Hi, John Leroux here from the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. And I've got a book here, a little dog-eared, but it's 60 years old. It's called Paintings, Beaverbrook Art Gallery. And this is the catalog from the gallery when it opened in 1959 in September. And it's a little bit formal. It lists in catalog form all of the collection at the time, which was only about 400 pieces. But in the middle, there's a color section, very, very small. And it just lists a few of the masterworks of the gallery. Things like Kriegoff's Merrymaking, Maurice, some group of seven works, Emily Carr, Fred Varley, things like that. And it has a single work from a maritime artist, only one in color, and it's this one. So they saw it as really important. And it is an important work, but it was by a very, very young artist and one of the first works that he ever had purchased by a major gallery. And it's by Fred Ross, and it's a work called Portrait of Sheila in Blue. It's one of my favorite paintings here at the gallery, and it has a fascinating story. Portrait of Sheila in Blue is a remarkable painting. It's one of my favorite works from the permanent collection of the Beaverbrook Art Gallery for a bunch of reasons. It has tremendous associations, first of all, obviously with St. John and with Fred Ross and the artists of the golden age of the 40s and 50s and 60s. But it also connects with Renaissance art, with the modern Mexican muralists. So it's got a whole bunch of loaded art history aspects to it. So let's go back and look at St. John and Fred Ross for a little bit. Fred Ross was one of the last key members of what we kind of know today as the golden age of painting in St. John. People like Miller Britton, Jack Humphrey, Ted Campbell came out of that time. Really significant Canadian reputations. That St. John was called a city which kind of per square mile had more artists than anywhere else in Canada. So Fred Ross graduated from the art program at St. John Vocational School in 1946. And he had a strong grounding in drawing from the figure, in humanistic drawing, in basically that art could be at the center of a revival of culture and society. It was critical to us as a population and as a people, and certainly coming out of World War II, it was a time of rebuilding and a sense of getting to the grounding of what it meant to be a citizen of the world. So he was also very interested in muralism, and that was taught quite deeply at St. John Vocational School in depicting people in large public artworks with a real social message. So it was beautiful, stunning art, very skilled, but it also had something to teach as well. This is a work called City Slums, which was in the former St. John Vocational School. It's now Harborview High in West St. John, and it talks about squalor and despair and urban poverty in St. John at the time, and that we needed to fight against that. It was a message of what not to do as a society. These were really pushed by his respect for a Mexican artist named Diego Rivera, who in the early 20th century was one of the most famous artists in the world. He almost rivaled Picasso in his fame for a while. This is a drawing that Fred Ross did when he actually visited him working in 1950 when he went down to Mexico. A rare drawing of his and Diego Rivera, who let him sketch him on a scaffold. And Rivera is known for his large social murals. He was one of the most prolific artists in history of works of Mexican history and so on. And he would work in fresco, in a very ancient method of working on wet plaster with pigment. And it basically lasts almost forever. Romans worked in fresco and the Renaissance artists. So it was a very time-honored style. So he also did a series of portraits as well. He was not beyond Diego Rivera getting a good commercial payoff. So he did some quite simple portraits compared to his murals, but of one on wealthy Americans. Here's one of his daughter as well, portrait of Ruth Rivera from 1949. And you can see just the tone, the simplicity, and even the brushwork in this kind of raw fresco-like color is something that Fred Ross really tried to emulate in his 1955 work of his wife, Portrait of Sheila in Blue. And what's striking about the composition of the Sheila painting is how it also really evokes this sense of depicting strong women in very simplified kind of backgrounds and environments from that time. Here's a remarkable black and white photograph from 1950 by the master photographer Irving Penn called Woman with Roses on Her Arm. And you can see some really distinct formal similarities to the portrait in Sheila, where you have a very strong, powerful woman with very upright with the flowers as well as an adjunct, but on a very bare background. So you're really drawn to her face, to the sort of the wisdom, this inner strength, and this insight through her eyes, and that sort of kind of crook in her arm as well. They're remarkably similar. And also this photograph by Walker Evans when he spent time in Havana in the 1920s, 1930s of a woman of this very simple dress form, in very vertical, the sort of pleats of it, kind of giving the sense of just a quiet, almost folksy dignity of woman with a little bit of kind of plants in the shoes coming through as well to give her a real grounded sense. Ross was also completely enamored by the early Renaissance, and Botticelli was one of his favorite artists. And here's one of Botticelli's masterworks called La Primavera from the late 15th century. Primavera means spring, and it's basically the spirits of spring and nymphs and goddesses sort of dancing in the garden. By the mid-50s, Ross carried this interest in Renaissance art really to its fullest potential. He did a whole series of works like this one, actually done in 1955, same year as Sheila in Blue, and it's called Harlequin with Four Dancers. And it's based on this Renaissance model called the Sacrée Conversazione, which is sacred conversation, where a series of patrons and potentially saints would be around the Holy Family or sacred figures. But it's his mid-1950s depiction of this, and Ross has actually himself in green next to his wife, Sheila. So again, same Sheila in Blue, done same year. You can see with the red hair and this dancer's pose next to him. And it's a fascinating portrayal of them, partly displaying their real life attributes as well. Sheila was a dancer, a professional ballet dancer who was born and raised in England. And in 1952, the St. John YWCA brought her over from England to become a dance teacher, start a dance school in St. John. And she's a beautiful, very talented dancer. So over here she met young painter Fred Ross. They got married in 1954, started a family, 3 kids, and she was often his model, like in Harlequin and Four Dancers. So she posed for one of his most famous works, obviously 1955, Portrait of Sheila in Blue, and that was purchased by Lord Beaverbrook simply because he really liked the painting. And it was also Ross's first work in a major gallery, so he considers it one of the hallmarks, the most important elements ever in his career, was Beaverbrook buying that. And so it hung in the gallery the day it opened to the public with the masterworks we have today. It was a really big deal. Beaverbrook bought the painting himself in 1955 after seeing it at an exhibition at the Art Gallery of Toronto, which is now the Art Gallery of Ontario. And it was an exhibition called 5 New Brunswick Artists, and it had such luminaries as Miller Britton, Jack Humphrey, Alex Colville, and the young Fred Ross. And what's interesting is that we have a letter as well that Beaverbrook wrote in 1955 to one of his gallerists, where he says, it's my desire to get the best pictures that are available. I'm not going for names anymore, just pictures. So it wasn't about buying famous artists, but just things that he liked. And he liked this painting by Fred Ross. And he says in the letter, I bought a picture by a man named Ross who paints in St. John for $150. It hangs in the Toronto Art Gallery. So we have the record of where he bought it, that he obviously liked it. And what's interesting, at that same exhibition, just as an aside, Beaverbrook also could have bought for a scant $400, which is $4,000 only in today's funds, Alex Colville's Horse and Train, which is one of his most famous paintings and worth by millions of dollars today. So anyway, such is life. Can't go back. When you look at the details of the face and the arms and the hands of Portrait of Sheila in Blue, it's really remarkable, and you get this incredible insight into just the spirit and character of Sheila Ross. You see her red hair pulled back in a ponytail and back. She's focused, she's intelligent, and it's interesting, the skin has this kind of greenish tone too, which goes back to even to some art history devices of green representing kind of a higher sense of spiritual enlightenment. Fred Varley, a member of the Group of 7, used to almost always paint his figures with a very kind of greenish tinge to their skin, and it was the representation of green being this theosphos color representing this higher sensibility of kind of closer to godliness. In Sheila's pose, the middle hand also has this interesting sort of cup feature, talking about a sense really of sort of humility, but also of giving and of strength. And the right hand, hanging down to her side, is holding this lovely but subtle little flower, just talking about sort of a care, she's, tending a garden or a care for nature, but just of someone with a real sensitivity. In the upper right-hand corner, there's Fred Ross's lovely signature, it was in 1955. And overall, again, it's just a very, very elegant, very solid, very grounded painting. When you compare a large Diego Rivera mural like this fresco in San Francisco from the 1930s, and you close up on one of the figures, you're really struck by the visible brushstrokes and the texture of working on the fresco. And that's a style that Fred Ross really tried to emulate, even though he wasn't working in fresco. He's working in a casing tempera on a masonite board. He really wanted to get that look, that sort of that thickness, that depth of the painted surface, which a fresco gave, because it is a very thick surface, and he was able to do that really well. Look at the side, the skin, the striations, and the brushstrokes on Sheila's face. It really evokes this sense of a Mexican or Renaissance fresco. And it's really striking when you compare it to a contemporary work or something just a few years later, done in the mid-1960s by Christopher Pratt. And it's a work in our permanent collection at the Beaverbrook called Young Woman Dressing. And that one's an oil on board, but that's all about smoothness. It's actually about hiding the brushstrokes and making them completely disappear. So there's a smoothness. So you can see a real different sensibility in the brushstrokes between what Ross was doing and what someone later on like Christopher Pratt was trying to do. When you consider the opening of the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in 1959, the artworks that it had by these renowned names and these precious masterworks, it's remarkable to see how much attention Fred Ross's portrait of Sheila in Blue got and how often it was reproduced in magazines. If they were doing an article on the gallery, it was almost inevitable that they would show a reproduction of Portrait of Sheila in Blue. The world seemed to love it. It even made it so far as into some kids' magazines, like this one of Red Cross Junior magazine, and even in 1967 it still had legs. And throughout his career later on, Fred Ross continued to depict and paint his wife, Sheila. This was a large mural that he did for the St. John Tourist Bureau in 1957. There you can see Sheila with her ubiquitous red hair. And in the early 1960s, he also painted her here, something with a little bit of a change in style, a little bit more realist and controlled. And this was actually depicted in a National Film Board movie from 1963 called Painting a Province. So we hope you enjoyed this tour of this remarkable, skilled, beautiful, introspective, elegant, loving portrait by Fred Ross of his wife Sheila called Portrait of Sheila in Blue. And we're looking forward to the day, hopefully very soon, when the Beaverbrook Art Gallery reopens and you can come and see this live as many times as you want. Thank you very much, and we look forward to sharing the next video with you. Have a great day.